Hey, this is Dominick, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominick and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode helping you to discover and live the great man within you. Today's episode is 3 steps to stop drifting and take command of your life. This is our second deep dive into a discussion on how to break free from the insidious evil of drift, that phenomenon in life where your patterns and habits push you into an extended period of autopilot, and then one day you wake up feeling uninspired, disconnected, and you don't really know why. I wrote about this in my book, Design Your Future, 3 steps to stop drifting and take command of your life. So if you haven't read the book, I encourage you to go read it. If you have read the book, this is going to be a deeper discussion on that and will reinforce your learning. So in today's episode, Brian and I talk about the 3 questions to tell whether you're drifting, 3 steps to break free from drift, why awareness of where you are drifting isn't enough to create change, why you need to disrupt limiting patterns, habits, and belief systems, and how to design a future you can't wait to live into. Hey, buddy, we've been getting some really nice messages from our listeners through our DMs, through our emails, and on the podcast, ratings and reviews. So I wanted to read you an email that I got that you haven't even had a chance to see yet because it came directly to me. And it comes from Ben in Brisbane, Australia. He said, "Hey, Dominick, I'm not sure if this email will reach you personally, but it does. And I just wanted to drop you a line and say thank you to yourself and Brian for awesome content that you put out on the Great Man Within podcast. Everything you guys do is fantastic. It's delivered practically. It's easy to understand, digest, and can be applied to everyday personal and work life. So now I'm busy experimenting, trying to apply your teachings to my life. And man, I'm making some good fuck ups along the way. And I'm now having conversations with people I would not have been able to have a few years ago. And I'm also doing a few things that make me throw up in my mouth, and I'm loving it and the personal growth that it brings. I just wanted to let you know that you've made an impact on my little life on the other side of the world, and I can't thank you enough.
Wow.
All the best, Ben."
Brisbane Ben, you are doing it right. If you are effing up along the way and throwing up in your mouth, yeah.
That's how it's done, man.
Yeah, so good to hear that feedback, man. I appreciate you sharing that with me because that's what lights me up.
Yeah.
When I hear the impact that this has, like the fact that you and I can have a lot of fun doing something and it's having a huge impact on somebody else's life. I love hearing those specific stories. I'd actually ask Ben, what are those specific things that are making you throw up? What are those specific conversations that you're now able to have? Because that's the gold.
Yeah, it is. And Ben, if you're listening, please send them our way. And I think this is actually a good opportunity for the rest of you who are listening. You know, we do mean what we say when we say, please reach out to us, share your stories. Let us know what episodes are resonating with you. Let us know how you're applying this stuff to your life. These are the things that help inform our discussions and also allows us to get to know you. One of the things that you and I have been talking about for a while, and I still need to get on top of this, is we're going to be starting a Facebook community group, right? For people who are interested in doing deeper inner work and sharing some of these stories, inspiring one another. And the more that you can direct us as to what you want us to focus in on, then we can also start to lead more challenges and make that a part of our community group. So if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram. I'm at Dominick Q. Brian, you're at?
Brian, Bryan, Stace, Stace.
Yeah. And check out doinnerwork.com. That's how many of our listeners reach out to us because there's a reach out form there. And along those same lines, the topic of today's conversation, once again, is this topic of how to break free from drift. 3 steps, simple steps to stop drifting and take command of your life. And the reason why we're having this conversation is since the very beginning of us launching this podcast back in January of 2019, the episode that has been in regularly the top 3 is the episode called The Number 1 Enemy to Living a Powerful Life, and that is drift. And what we talked about there was, this definition of hell, which is at the end of your life, the man that you became meets the man that you could have become. Like that sends shivers down my spine. The idea of like taking my last breath on earth and recognizing that I didn't live up to my fullest potential, that happens when we live our lives in a state of drift, man.
Yeah. And Dominick, talking about feedback, getting notes from folks, I've had 3 conversations this past week from people that have been in my life for 15 plus years. But they wanted to come and talk to me. And some of these are acquaintances, some of them are good friends. They wanted to talk to me about some of the work that you and I are doing. And they always have, there's always one different thing and one same thing that they all say. The same thing is talking about that specific podcast about drift, and it resonated. Meeting that man at the end of your life, what you could have been and not meeting your potential. Like that just strikes a huge chord. The other thing that's different that they all say is another podcast, which is usually either the Sex Addicts Anonymous story, masturbation, or whatever else lit them up that kind of pulled them into it. But it seems that this idea of drift is something that we can all take a look at and use that as a way to spark some awareness in our lives.
Yeah, we're going to define what drift is in a moment here. But drift can show up in so many different contexts of our lives. And that's probably what's driving those specific podcasts that people are referencing. You know, you could be lighting it up in your business, but you could be really drifting at home in your relationship with your partner, or you could be drifting in your relationship with your health, in your sleep. You could be drifting in your relationship with purpose and really feeling lit up by your life. And chances are there's always going to be periods of time in your life where you're lit up by something and also drifting in other areas because it's such a pervasive feeling. So drift is the term that I've borrowed from Napoleon Hill, who's, you know, one of the greatest writers of all time. He's the father of personal achievement. No books had ever been written on personal achievement until Napoleon Hill released Think and Grow Rich back in the 1930s. I believe it was 1937. And it was at the tail end of the Great Depression. If you think about the timing of that, man, like writing a book on personal achievement after a decade of the longest depression that this country and world has ever seen.
Yeah, not exactly timely.
Yeah, it seemed like it wouldn't be timely, and yet it became the perfect time. And the reason why he ended up writing that book was he had a mentor by the name of Andrew Carnegie Steel, who charged Napoleon with unlocking the secrets of success. And he said, Napoleon, if you want to figure out how the richest and the most successful people became that way, then go out and interview 500 of the world's most successful and rich people. So that's what he did. Over a period of decades, he ended up interviewing Henry Ford, the Roosevelts, the Rockefellers, JP Morgan, Charles Schwab, King Gillette, all the big names, mined their secrets, wrote the Bible for abundance and personal development called Think and Grow Rich. The secondary piece of advice that Andrew Carnegie gave Napoleon Hill is the one that I'm most interested in. And I know that you connect to this most closely too, Brian, which is if you want to understand the full human experience, not just the most successful, the full human experience, and you need to go out and interview 10 times as many of those people who are at the end of their lives, who feel like they have left chips on the table, like they lived a life of regret, like they didn't meet their fullest potential, like they've lived out that definition of hell. Go talk to them, mine their secrets, and write the book on that, write the cautionary tale. And so he spent 25 years talking to these people and interviewed 25,000 of them. And he distilled their stories into a book that he calls Outwitting the Devil, which if anyone's listened to the show for any period of time, we've beat that drum relentlessly. And in that book, he has a conversation with the devil, who is the embodiment of those 25,000 dreams that were lost. And what the devil says in the book is that I enter people's minds through habit. And through their habits, I establish the state of drifting. And once I can get someone to drift, I can lead him straight towards the gates of hell. And what he's saying there is that when we think we're making conscious decisions in our lives, right? We think we're behind the driver's wheel of our own car. In actuality, we're sitting in the back seat or maybe even in the trunk of our own car while our habits, our patterns, our belief systems, pressure from society or what our parents told us to do or what our partners or our business tells us to do, that's the stuff that's actually driving our lives. And that is drift. And it's only when an outside force thrusts itself upon us and wakes us up do we recognize and snap out of that state of drift and start to ask ourselves some deeper questions. But you know from personal experience, Brian, and from listening to stories from our clients, that wake-up call from drift can actually be pretty crappy.
Well, that's the thing. Most of the time we wait until it is crappy.
Yeah.
Right. And because we're just drifting, we don't know. And that's the thing. Like if somebody told us, hey, we're drifting in this area, we might take action and do something. But in most cases, we don't, because we're just living life and we're just unaware that we're actually drifting. So I think a huge piece of this, and you talk about this in the first book that you wrote, that cultivating the awareness and catching that, oh, I'm doing this thing, this habit that I just always do, like input, output, like we're running a software program until something else. Now, when you say it can be crappy, for me, one of those situations was being diagnosed with cancer and having to take a hard look at my behavior, my identity, like who I thought I was. That was a crappy way to bring awareness.
That's right.
And a big part of what you and I do on this podcast and in other aspects of our lives is how do we cultivate, how do we bring that awareness into our lives that, hey, we're drifting and we want to do something differently, but let's do it in a softer way. Let's not wait until we get cancer. Let's not wait until we get fired. Let's not wait until we ruin a relationship.
That's right.
And there's ways that we can do that. We can cultivate that awareness.
That's right, man. And listen, life is going to throw curveballs at you, right? Things are going to happen that will wake you up, that you will be forced to react to respond to. And those can be beautiful moments for asking deeper questions, for changing trajectory in your life. For you, when you got that wake-up call around testicular cancer and being diagnosed with chlamydia on the same day, it forced you to look at like the decisions you were making with your life. It forced you to take a harder look at, how do I respond to when my body is starting to scream and to show signs that there's something wrong here? I've been ignoring it or suppressing it or trying to act like it doesn't exist. And it's causing you to set out a new trajectory where over these past few years, ever since I've known you, you've been very intentional around listening to yourself, listening to your body, and making better decisions. The antidote to drifting is intentionality. Right? Like if drifting is unconsciously being dragged around by your habits and patterns, belief systems, pressures, and expectations of others, then the way to break that is through making intentional decisions. And what you're saying here is that intentionality with respect to looking at your life and saying, I don't need an outside force like cancer. I don't need a Mack truck to hit me. I don't need my wife to leave me. I don't need my business to fire me. I don't need to have a heart attack because I've ground myself into a nub to actually wake up from this stuff. I can look at it far sooner than that and intentionally break free from drift. And we're going to give you 3 steps on how to do that.
Yeah, it's the difference between having to react to something versus proactively going after it. And in the consulting world, we used to call this a burning platform. And so we would go to our clients and say, what's your burning platform? What's the thing that you absolutely have to do? Otherwise, your business, you, your team, whoever it is going to fail. And when we wait for that burning platform to happen, it's a lot harder to course correct. There's a lot more collateral damage involved.
Yeah.
So I would say the opposite of reaction. And we talked about a lot about this in sexual health too, is like stop waiting until something happens and go get tested.
That's right.
And this is bringing that awareness in this softer areas. That's what we're talking about here, doing that proactively.
Well, that burning platform you're talking about, man, I mean, what that does, so the benefit of the burning platform is that it can no longer be ignored, right? Like it's very clear. The decision is made for you. Like, okay, this is the thing that I now have to address. There's a certain eloquent beauty in that clarity. But let's talk about what you're training yourself to do. You're basically training yourself to endure like an extended period of time of descent into a really terrible feeling. Like the burning platform, it starts with getting hot. It starts with feeling bad. It starts with you losing clients. And then eventually it gets to a place where it's so bad you can no longer do it anymore. That's not really a life that I want to live, right?
Yes, there's beauty in the clarity, but it also takes a really long fucking time
to get.
There's a lot of pain that's associated with that.
That's right.
And so maybe start working on the platform. The visual I have in my head is an oil rig out in the middle of the ocean. And it's like, if you see something, if you feel a symptom, or even proactively maybe go inspect it and start to work on that platform before it's burning.
That's right, man. The thing here that we're talking about is we have 3 steps here for you to intentionally break free from drift. And I'm going to hit these at a high level, and then we'll dive in a little bit more deeply to each of them. The 3 steps, and I talk about this in my book, Design Your Future, to break free from drift and to take command of your life are: number one, you need to create awakenings from where you are in drift. Number two, you need to disrupt your habits and patterns that are keeping you stuck. And then number three, you need to design new behaviors, new environments, new systems to create new outcomes in your life. Right? That's quite simple. And we'll go in a deeper dive into each of them. But I think the first place we want to really start is getting you clear on where you are drifting in your life. Like, how do you know when you're drifting? And in the first podcast that we did on this, and I would encourage you to go back, I think it's like the second or third episode we released called The Number One Enemy to Living a Powerful Life. Brian and I go through 7 questions, right? Like to ask yourself about where you're drifting in your life. I see you smiling. What do you got going on in your head right there?
I remember when and I actually don't remember if we did this in the podcast or not, but I remember doing this at your retreat. And just like you said, there's a list of 7 things to take a look at and see where you're drifting in life. And I remember at your retreat, we're starting to go through this list. And just to give a quick example, number 1 on that list was, are your fears driving your behavior? And I was feeling really great. I was like, no, man, no. Fears don't drive my behavior. Love drives my behavior, or I drive my behavior. And so I was good. And I remember then going through the next few. I was like, nope, not drifting there, not drifting there. And I feel like I'm getting A's across the board. And all of a sudden, like one just hit me so hard. I was like, oh, that's my drift. That's the area in which I was drifting the most. And that one, if you remember, and it had become a theme that I really worked on throughout that year and continue to work on, is I begin many things but complete nothing. And the second one was number 6, which is you criticize others publicly or privately in your own mind. And I didn't realize I was even doing that because it wasn't outwardly. I wasn't saying anything to anyone. I wasn't criticizing anybody. But what I realized at the end of that retreat is I was killing each of them privately in my subconscious. So if somebody said something, well, I'm at this retreat because I've been really successful in business and I've sold 3 companies, but I never really quite feel fulfilled. My background, my head was like, oh, that's so sad. You don't feel fulfilled. You're super rich and you're really successful. I don't know why I was doing that, but that was the voice in the back of my head. So that was a big awakening. So I looked at that 7, thought I was doing pretty well, and then found those areas. Yes, there are areas of my life where I'm drifting.
Yeah. And I think that those wake-up calls are beautiful catalysts for you to, again, ask those deeper questions and to take a deeper look. So for example, like your internal criticism of others, Napoleon Hill is the one who points this out, right? Like you criticize others either publicly or privately. And what Napoleon Hill talks about is, if you're really on purpose, then you don't have time to be criticizing other people. Like you're not giving your energy to that. You may see something that you may bristle at, but you let it go so quickly that like your energy goes back to living on purpose.
On purpose, right?
Right. And when we're criticizing others, like in your example, there could be an element of, well, wow, this guy's really successful. I need to knock him down a peg in my own mind because there's some sort of threat to the fact that like I haven't made it. I haven't arrived in that same way. And what happens is your mind gets so proficient at doing it that it skips over, like you don't even recognize that you're doing it because maybe you feel threatened and you project onto that person. It's like, oh, that guy, he's got the problem. And you don't even ever look at inwards as to where you're falling short.
Yeah. And the big aha for me is once I realized that voice was there, once I realized it was what it was saying, I then realized that every time I stepped in a room with a group of men, I was competing. In every single way. So every time a guy said something or did something, I was comparing myself to that, competing with them unknowingly. And that was a really miserable way to live and impossible to connect with other guys.
That's right. That's right. And you and I talk about a lot of that is around groups of men. We've conditioned ourselves to competing with other men, to sizing them up. Who's the alpha dog? Who's the person that I'm superior over? Who's my boy? Who's my threat? All of that. And most guys are drifting when they walk into those environments because that's just, again, a lifetime of conditioned response, of belief systems. And that prevents you from actually connecting with other guys. So we want to wake up to that, right? We want to create these intentional awakenings. So go back to that podcast. Definitely listen to those 7 questions. Brian gave you a few of them. I want to give you 3 new ones. And by the way, there's no end to these drifting questions, but these are just places that we've seen come up in conversations with clients or people have been reaching out to us. So this first question is really with respect to your business, your work. So number 1, Are you working exponentially harder for incrementally better results? Are you working exponentially harder for incrementally better results? And I'll let you weigh in here in a minute, Brian, but to dive deeper into that, what we're talking about here is, do you know the experience of, instead of an 8-hour workday, it's an 11-hour workday, right? Instead of having clear boundaries of when you're going to stop work, you're always available. You bring your laptop on vacation and you're checking in every morning. And then instead of every morning, now you're taking conference calls in the middle of your vacation. And then when you step back and you actually look at the results you're getting, that your production just really isn't that much more valuable, that your pay isn't actually increasing in alignment with the amount of effort you're putting in. Like, so you're putting in 30% more effort, but you're getting 5% greater returns. That's exponentially bigger effort, working harder with an incremental better return. The math doesn't work. And Strategic Coach, which is an entrepreneurial coaching program, calls this the ceiling of complexity, where all of your habits and patterns that you've used before, what's gotten you here won't get you there. And you bump up against this self-imposed ceiling. That's when you know that you're drifting.
Yeah. My first thought goes to what results? So are we talking about how much we're getting paid? Are we talking about the recognition that we want to receive, meeting whatever mission is that we have going there? But I've definitely been in those situations. And one of the reasons that I left corporate is because I felt like that was the expectation, that I would continue to work harder. Probably for a year after I left corporate, I had unconditioned myself from being constantly tethered to my computer. I felt strange if I wasn't connected at 9 p.m. I felt strange if I wasn't connected at some point on a Saturday. And now I'm in a place where I can shut the computer down and that feels good. But that took some time.
Yeah.
So I think this is more the rule than the exception.
Yeah. I'll give you an example from my life. You know, as an entrepreneur, I get a chance to choose whatever I want to do for my business. It's 100% in my control. And there was a period of time at the end of last year where I found myself constantly busy. Like, I'm either writing a piece of content, I'm ready to record one of these podcasts, I'm going and speaking, I'm doing coaching engagements, I'm standing on panels, I'm writing a book, I'm running around doing all of these things. My days are scheduled like from top to bottom. And when I stepped back and I looked at what was my income, what was the impact I was making on larger humanity, what was my feeling of freedom feeling like? And I looked at all of that. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm actually not setting myself up for like the kind of success, and I'm not making the impact on the world that I really thought that I would be. And I was like, something needs to change. And when I stepped back and I looked at my ecosystem of to-dos and busyness, I was recognizing that I wasn't aligned, right? Like, there was a lot of scattered things that kept me in a state of motion that, like, when I was doing it, it felt like progress, but at a bigger macro level, it wasn't. And so I was like, oh, okay. And I had to make a few big decisions around where the future of the work was going to be. And that's where the Great Man Mastermind came into existence, right? Like, oh, I'm going to bring a group of men together to work long-term over the period of a year. And now I'm building community, and these guys are going to impact their own lives and the lives that they care about. Oh, okay. And this has felt really energizing, clarifying. It also meant like I had to stop doing some things, and I had to, say goodbye to things that I'd already invested in and, sunk costs in certain arenas. So I had to make tough decisions. But now my efforts that I'm putting in, if I'm putting in exponentially more effort, I'm getting exponentially better returns in the money that I'm making and the impact that I'm making and the freedom I'm feeling.
This is such a good example, Dominick. We opened this podcast talking about cultivating awareness, and sometimes that can be really hard, or that we use the cancer example, but there's other areas that are softer that we can intentionally bring awareness into our lives and then disrupt it. Yes. And what this story is a great example. So let's suspend reality for 1 second and go back to that moment. Let's say you didn't catch it. You weren't aware because you didn't provide any reflection. You weren't looking for patterns, and you just kept going. There's a lot of other outcomes that could have happened. It could have been a health risk. It could have been a money risk. It could have been some really pretty disastrous things if you didn't catch that. But what you use was a tool of reflection, of saying, hey, am I getting the results that I actually want? If not, then something needs to change. And you came to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And that's a different way to bring awareness than just waiting until the platform's burning.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, the thing that's coming to my mind is the disastrous outcome, right? Like the heart attack or the burning platform. yes, it's disastrous, but I almost feel like the more insidious thing is where that doesn't happen, where there is no wake up call. And then it actually, like, the pain is just below that threshold, just below that tipping point where you can actually just extend that out over an entire life where it slowly kills your spirit. And we see this with people, right? Like, we all know the person who's been in the job for too long. And when you look at them, like, you could see their spirit has died. Like the fire has burned out and it's not coming back.
Dead eyes.
Yes.
They look like zombies. And this is also, I mean, you opened the podcast with this too, when you're on your deathbed and you meet the guy that you could have been. That's what that equation is.
Yeah.
It's
yes.
too late for the burning platform.
Yes. And it happens so slowly, man. And the reason why I'm banging on this, because I know there's someone who's listening right now who's kind of like, no, I'm busy and I'm feeling pretty good. I know I'm getting stuff done, but there's something that's missing, right? Like there's an element of, like, do you know that what you're doing right now is connecting to some higher purpose? That, like, this is contributing to something where when you're 80-year-old Brian and you look back on 38-year-old, 39-year-old?
39. But I said I'd say it really quick, not to interrupt your thought process here, but 80-year-old Brian's going to be hot.
He's going to be a stud.
Dude, that 80-year-old guy is going to be kicking.
He's going to have the same hair. It's going to just be like, you're going to be a silver fox. It's just going to be a grayed out. You know
if I use your moisturizing lotion, I will be a hot 80-year-old. Yes.
That's probably true. That when I'm 80 years old and I look back on what I was doing when I was 39, that, like, I could see that I was laying bricks for this castle that I'm now living in, and that my family and my society, like my community I care about, is living in. That's what I want you to get really clear on, because there's so many men who are running around busy as hell and have every reason to justify every little action that you're doing. But at the end of the day, there's like that feeling of, I'm pouring water into a cup that's leaking.
That resonates with me big time. When I run interviews for some companies, a question I always ask is, why here now? Like, what is it about this role that's going to play a pivotal part in your life right now? And I can't tell you how many answers I get that is someone trying to fit into the corporate mission, the corporate vision. It's like, look how good I am. Or the answers that I love are the answers where, like, well, I'm looking to develop this skill so I can do X, Y, Z. I'm looking to have a stable financial system so I can do this with my family. Like, there's that bigger purpose that usually comes out or should come out in those conversations, but not many people can actually state that.
And as you're a hiring manager in those conversations, there's something about that person that you can't trust, right? Because
that's exactly
when they're drifting with their answers, there's a lack of energy, there's a lack of clarity, there's a lack of intention. And for you, then you're like, I can't trust this person. What they're saying is true, that they're going to show up with kind of energy and commitment and determination that I would want them to if they're going to be on my team.
That's exactly it. I want to know what your intentions are, because I want to know if they match with what we need to do here as a company. And I want to know if I can help you do that.
Yeah.
It's got to be a good fit.
Yeah. Cool. So let's move on to the next question. All right. Second question here. And this one's really in the arena of relationship. Question around whether or not you're drifting. Do you feel like no one truly understands or knows you? Do you feel like no one really understands or knows you? Brian, like, you and I know what this feeling is like, right? Where we had these like worlds inside of us that we never shared with anyone. My history of addiction, I had a private Dominick and a public Dominick, right? The public Dominick that formed at a very early age, which was the Dominick that I thought the world wanted to see, that my parents praised for good behavior, that teachers praised for good grades, that coaches praised for falling in line, that priests praised for being a holy student. And then the rest of me that was imperfect, that I felt like wouldn't be welcomed, was my private Dominick. The private Dominick who had sexual desires that were wrong in the eyes of church. And I kept this private side of me hidden from the world. And then over the course of my life, I kind of had these two worlds, and I never allowed someone to see my private lives. And over the course of decades, I became pretty lonely without having those words for it. And I never felt like anyone truly understood me.
Yeah, you were lonely with a lot of friends.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And as you say that, man, I was just talking to a guy the other night who just joined the Great Man Mastermind, has a beautiful wife, kids who adore him, crushes it at work. And after everyone goes to bed at night, this deep sense of loneliness like just washes over him because he feels like no one understands him. And the reason for it is because there are worlds inside of him that he's shut off to himself, and he's certainly not shown anyone else. So how could anyone outside of him ever truly know and understand him when there are worlds within him that he's never visited himself? He's been drifting. I was drifting. And I know certain times in your life, you never felt like you didn't feel like you were understood or known by others too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's some quote, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's something like, we can't be at a depth of relationship to where we've never gone within ourselves. Mm. And so if we've taken the time to understand, like, what am I really feeling? What am I really interested in? Who is the real me? That's something that we can then express and we can connect with other people on. But without doing that, then what do we expect in a relationship? Of course, nobody's going to know you. Of course, nobody's going to be able to connect with you on the deeper level.
Yeah. I mean, even what you're saying, I think there's a general lack of awareness. I know for me, I actually had worlds that I hadn't explored inside of me. Like, I always thought that I was pretty self-aware. Like, if you were to ask me, I was cocky about, like, one of my greatest gifts is my self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And yet there were so many parts of but I couldn't have told you that I had a public Dominick and a private Dominick, like, because it had become like such a thing that I drifted into that I couldn't delineate between those two worlds. Most men can't recognize that.
What about now? Where do you feel like you're at on the awareness scale now?
So, the more that I learn about myself, the more humble I become in terms of like how much I actually feel I know. Because as I've uncovered more and more worlds, I recognize that there will be no end to this game. Like, there will constantly be new things that I learn about myself, that blind spots, fears, insecurities, hidden talents that I didn't even know that I had, right? These are all things that over time have revealed themselves to me. And I think the most dangerous person that I come in contact with is the man who says, I know myself, right? Puts the hand up as like a shield to don't look at me any closer because I know myself, which is really, to me, it's kind of like you've just revealed yourself as someone who doesn't know himself, who doesn't want to be looked at and probably needs it the most. But I would say, yes, compared to where I was before, I know more about myself than I ever have. And the more I get to know, the more I recognize that, like, there are so many worlds inside of me that maybe I will never be able to explore all of them fully before the time I take my last breath here.
I'm going to jump ahead of your third question here. I'm going to propose one of my own, just coming up on the spot here.
Lay it.
But I think just what you said, that if you haven't had a shift in perspective, if you haven't had some sort of awakening or new understanding that played a big part in your life, and you don't feel like you've grown over the past year, 2 years, decade, whatever, it's probably a pretty good indicator that you're drifting.
Ooh, I like that one, man.
Because I can go back and look at my journal. I can go back and look at the notes I put on my whiteboard. Say, like, wow, like, my belief of who I am, why I'm here, has changed dramatically based on different experiences.
Okay, so I'm going to get rid of my third question and we'll just put that one in there instead.
Oh,
right?
Wow. Here we are.
Yeah. The question number 3 around like where you could be drifting. And I would just say, I would probably put that under the category of purpose, really.
Yeah.
And if you haven't experienced, let's expand the horizon to a 10-year period. If you look back over your last decade and there hasn't been some sort of meaningful awakening about why you're here, beyond just yourself, like a higher sense of contribution to something bigger than you. If you haven't felt something like that, then chances are you've been drifting. A decade is a long period of time, and you and I both have had countless awakenings over the last 10 years. And, you and I have even said it feels like an entire lifetime lived in 10 years in the best of ways. Because like when you are breaking free from drift, creating these awakenings, disrupting your limiting behaviors, designing a new way of being, it's novel, it's rich, your life is robust. You have moments that you will remember for the rest of your life. That's living an intentional life.
It sounds like Ben from Brisbane. He is living that life now, right? I feel like I'm going to throw up. I feel like I'm doing things wrong. Great. That probably means because you're breaking from drift. If I'm listening to this podcast right now, the question that I'd be asking myself is, okay, Dominick and Brian, so apparently breaking from drift is a big thing. And I will know because I will have awakenings. I'll have new understandings. That hasn't happened. Now what? What do I do?
Right.
And so I'd love to give everyone a couple ways to start poking. Now guarantees, but start areas to start exploring.
Right.
And I think the first one is, and I call this a superpower, but is intentionally requesting feedback from people that you respect and care about.
Mm.
Create a space and ask them for what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, how you would like for you to show up, because they're going to provide a mirror to some behaviors and patterns that they see in you that you just can't do on your own. And this is not work, by the way. And Napoleon Hill talks about this in Outwitting the Devil. This is not work to do on your own.
Right.
Get with a group. That's the best way to break out of drift, is to get with a group. And this is one way to do it, is to ask for feedback.
Let's take that and drill it down even further. So first of all, if you're listening, think about an area of your life where you're feeling like there's a loss of energy, or you're feeling like you're underclubbing it, right? So this could be, maybe my work I'm not feeling as inspired in my work, or I'm constantly yo-yoing in my diet and my health and how much I weigh. I'm watching too much porn. I've fallen out of love with my partner. Like, just think about the area for you, right? That is very specific for you, that you're like, okay, I'm drifting here. There's an opportunity for an upgrade. Great. Now, let's take Brian's approach here, which is reaching out to someone and asking them for that feedback. So, Brian, let's take this specific example of, you're in a partnership, and let's just say you're a man and you're dating a woman, and it was hot and heavy. There's love there, but something's happened over the course of time where there's no more chemistry right now, right? Like the sexual polarity has dissipated and you're kind of just going through the motions. How would you use your suggestion to ask for feedback on breaking free from drift in that situation?
I'm having trouble with that specific scenario, but in relationship, I want to use a very real one that I'm in right now. So I'm in a relationship, and the relationship is going well, but it's an important part of my life. And so I've asked Becca when I came back home, this is a few days ago, I said, hey, where in this relationship could I be showing up better? And so I didn't give her the opportunity to be like, everything's great, you're doing super, I love you, right? All that's true. Great, all that's true. And where could I be showing up better?
Right.
Because again, I don't want to wait for that burning platform. I don't want to wait for that situation where things feel dead. I want to keep the flame alive.
Yes.
And so she was able to provide some feedback for me. I'm like, well, if you were doing this, and it was just this little tiny surface level thing, and we got to dive deep on that. And I learned some things about myself in terms of how I can be more intentional with the time that we're spending together.
Right.
And that was super valuable.
Right. Great. Let's put some context around this. What we're doing now, step number one of breaking free from drift, is to create awakenings, right? An awakening comes in two different forms, right? The unintentional awakenings and the intentional awakenings. The unintentional awakenings is Brian's getting testicular cancer, right? It's unintentional, wakes up, and now he makes a change. The intentional awakenings are the ones that we're most interested in cultivating. And Brian, with your example of going out and asking for input, right, from like your partner, how could I be like a better partner? Like, well, how could I be showing up better in this relationship? You're creating an intentional awakening to something that, like, an opportunity that you weren't aware of by actively soliciting that. And one more point of focus here is the reason why I use the word awakening versus awareness is you're aware, you're observing something. Awakening is that point where you are ready to take action. That's a very big thing, right? Because I could be aware that I'm smoking cigarettes, and I'm aware that I use that to calm down or to take a break, and I want to change, but I'm actually going to continue to keep smoking. Well, then you haven't really had your awakening. It's where you've reached that tipping point where, like, it's time to do something.
Yeah.
That's the awakening stage.
Yeah, there might be aware. So I love that distinction, because we can be aware of something. I'm Brian, and if I keep eating cookies, my body's not going to function the way I want it to function. I'm and continue to be aware of that, yet I still like my cookies. Haven't had an awakening on cookies yet. I'm waiting for that to happen. But there's a big difference, right? There's no action being taken.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but one of the things that people reach out to me most about when they talk about our show, they talk about you being the cookie monster. You've like developed this term, like people just see you as this great guy on the path who is constantly sabotaged by cookies.
That's right. I'm walking the path of enlightenment, and then just tackled by Cookie Monster every 2 weeks.
Sniper shots. Yeah. Okay. So, like, let's move forward to this next step of, okay, now there's an awakening. I'm ready to make a change. You've been given this feedback by your partner, Brian, right? That, like, there's a new way of being able to show up. This next step, the second way out of drift after awakening, that oftentimes people skip is the disrupting stage, right? Stage number 1 is awakening. Stage number 2 is disrupting. And disrupting is stopping, interrupting a pattern that has persisted, that has played out over a period of time. And there are different forms of stopping. You can interrupt a pattern. You can stop doing something altogether. You can run different experiments to try and change, like to give you feedback on like new ways of implementing behavior. But let's stick with this example, Brian, right? You've now been giving this feedback about the way that you're showing up with the quality of time that you are providing inside your partnership. What's the pattern that you would need to disrupt?
The pattern that I need to disrupt is the go with the flow mentality. Like, hey, we'll figure it out. Like when we come together, we'll chit chat and then we'll go do something. That's the pattern. Did that answer your question?
That totally answers. And that's the thing. Like, so here's the thing. One of the great things about you is your ability to be in the flow. Like you're the guy who shows up, life of the party. You can hang with anything. And like people love that about you. I love that about you. Your partner loves that about you. And then there's a time where she craves some more structure, some more take commandedness. And that's what she's asking for because she wants to feel your masculine energy. She wants to feel that you're leading her, right? So now let's disrupt that pattern and let's move to this. So disrupting that pattern basically means that some of the times you're going to be able to go with the flow, but now we need something new to take its place, which is where you're going to be designing a new behavior.
This is step 3.
The step 3 is designing.
Okay.
So step 1 is awakening. Step 2 is disrupting. Step 3 is designing. So let's say you're going to design something new, a next date or a next night in with your partner. What could be one potential way that you could design a new way of being?
Yeah, so you probably can't see it from where you're at, but on my whiteboard, you'll see something in green towards the top. And it says, explore days with B.
Huh.
And B is Becca, right? And so what I'm looking at, I'm just finding things that I'm interested in, something that I want to learn, something that I want to go experience, conversations that I want to have. And I'm figuring out where I can go explore that with her. Because what I found when I was looking at the design part of this, I was finding some heaviness in having to create exactly what the schedule is going to be. And I was like, I don't want this to be heavy. I want this to be fun. And for me, exploring together is a lot of fun. And so I'm just finding the areas where we can go explore. Not that I have the answer, but I can go figure out how to do.
Right on. And see what I love about this. I mean, this is just a really simple example of, and I would almost say you weren't even drifting. It was almost like you started this process before drift set in, right? Because like you have this desire to be a partner that creates an environment where you and Becca can thrive together, right? That's one of the principles that we talk about as a great man living on that path. And so you brought the question to her proactively. Like I have this awakening that I want to be in alignment with the great man. And I'm going to ask her this question about like, what could I be doing to serve this relationship better? And the fact that you gave her that floor to offer up her feelings, what that did was it short circuited that entire trajectory. If it had played out over a long period of time where she didn't have a forum to act, like to bring that to you, or she felt uncomfortable, or maybe she was just unaware, that weeks and months go by where you've lost her trust, where she starts to feel less sexually attracted to you because you're just kind of showing up in the flow, where she doesn't feel safe, where she doesn't feel seen and honored. You short circuit that entire trajectory by having that awakening, by disrupting your pattern. And now you're in the process of designing potential new ways of being. And you're going to find out through experimentation of doing these things with her if they fit or if you jettison them and try something new.
Right. And that to me, for the design part was really important because as soon as it started to feel like, oh my God, I got to plan everything. I got to be on time. How much is this going to cost? Right. All of a sudden it got very constricted.
Yeah.
And so then I asked myself, how can I still provide direction and lead without making this feel really heavy where we can explore this whole thing together?
Yeah, man.
So Dominick, there's another place where I've seen this pattern play out around awakening, disrupting, designing. And let me hit this fast because it was a big one. And it's very concrete. I went to go see a guy named Eric Thomas. The only reason I went to go see him is because a friend of mine had bought me a ticket for my birthday. And I said, okay, I'll go. I have no idea what this is about. He's a powerhouse of a motivational speaker. And one of the very simple ideas he was talking about was this idea of energy. And like, wouldn't this be a pretty cool world if we lived in, that you lived in, if you never had to sleep, if you had constant, high-powered energy 24/7. And I was like, wow, what could I accomplish if that was true? And so he started having us do an audit of our life of what are the things that give us energy and take away energy. So when he brought this to my existence, or to my understanding, I said, wow, this is really cool. I wonder what those things are in my life. And so the awakening was, if I had a ton of energy, what would I do with that time and energy? Okay, cool. The design part, or the disrupt part, was the ready to make that change. I want, if it's possible, to have 24/7 high energy, right? Third part was the design. And so I went back and started to identify those things in my life that took away energy. And some of those things were not drinking enough water throughout the day. Some of them were not getting enough sleep, obviously. I found ways I could get more energy. I'd never drank coffee at that point in my life. And I just heard about something called bulletproof coffee. That's something part of my life. And so I started to design my life around these things that either give me energy or don't take away energy. And that fundamentally changed my life. And so this pattern of awake, of disrupt, of design is huge. And it doesn't have to start with anything big.
It's so simple, man. Like, it's a great example. And the way that I would modify that is when you started going through that inventory of the things that took away your energy, right? And also gave you energy, you were still part of the awakening process. Like, you were still in that stage of like, oh, look at this. Like, this is what contributes. This is what takes away. And then when you started taking a look at, well, I'm going to stop doing some of these things that take away energy, that's the disrupting part.
That's
right?
That great distinction. That is true. Because I didn't know at that point, I didn't know what I was going to actually change. I had to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. And then as you're disrupting, the beautiful part about the disrupting part, and this is like why I said before, a lot of people skip over the disrupting part. The disrupting part is what gives you all of the feedback and the information about, oh, like, this is how it feels not to be doing stuff that sucks. Like, this is how it feels to not be obligated, but I can actually spend more of my time, my greatest energy. That's awesome. Or sometimes during the disruption part, in our examples in past history, disruption could be taking 30 days off of porn, taking 50 days off of television, or 7 days off of television. Like, I go extreme with mine, but like, if you're starting, take a week off of television, right? Take a week off of alcohol. These are just examples of disruption. And you can get information about why you were doing it in the first place. And then at the end of that temporary period, at the end of that experiment, now it's time for the design phase. Like, you're now looking for what are the new behaviors from this point forward based on the information that I just got from these experiments that I can use to inform living a more intentional existence.
One of the things I found when it came to energy was when I am in creation mode, I get a lot of energy. When I'm developing, when I'm creating, when I'm doing. When I'm in consume mode and I'm consuming TV shows, this or that, like, I realized my energy went down.
Yeah.
And so to your point that I was like, okay, I figured that out. Now, where do I want to create more in my life?
Yes.
And again, that was from a very simple beginning of a very simple awareness, not awakening at that point, but an awareness of this whole thing called energy. It completely changed how I show up in life.
I love it, man. As a really simple example. And like you said, this doesn't have to be something dramatic. It doesn't have to be something huge. Apply it to one area of your life where you feel like you're drifting now, and see the results for yourself, and then go bigger each time, because like, it's easier to start with the low hanging fruit, feel the benefits of the change, and then to go and tackle some of these bigger things. Drifting is that state of being where your habits and patterns and unconscious belief systems are running your life. And to break free from drift, you need 3 steps to take command of your life. Number 1, creating awakenings that allow you to be ready to make an actual change. Number 2 is disrupting your patterns and habits that are keeping you stuck and living into a future of more of the same. And then number 3, you are designing the new way of living and behaving that gets you the outcomes that you're looking for in your life. Hey, if you remember from the beginning of this episode, I read a letter from Ben in Brisbane, Australia, telling us about how he is taking command of his life, stepping up, breaking patterns and habits, and making changes that cause him to throw up a little bit in his mouth, but also allow him to explore new levels of potential and possibility in his life as well. We love hearing these stories from you, our listeners, so please reach out to us. I read every single email that comes through. You can reach me at doinnerwork.com. Doinnerwork.com. There's an opportunity for you to reach out, share your story, tell us what episodes you're loving, tell us what episodes and topics you would want us to cover. And eventually, I will get our Facebook community together so that you can come to one place, meet other listeners, start to live a life of your own design. And until then, we want to hear your stories. So reach out through doinnerwork.com. Tell us of all your successes. Tell us about your failures and obstacles too. Those are just as helpful. It always helps us to inform where we go next. Thank you.